Gulliver is a very unreliable narrator, never more unreliable than he is in Part 4, The Voyage to the Land of the Winds. But his attack in chapters 5 and 6 of Part 4 on the institutions of modern Britain, Swift's Britain, are genuinely something that Swift more or less shares. Swift is a satirist and a moralist. He attacks things that he views as vices, as moral failings. Swift's worldview suggests most problems in the world are fundamentally moral problems. I'm not telling you this because it's true, or because I think it's true. I'm telling you this because it is Swift's position and should be considered. I am going to push back on him a little bit because it turns out there is actually other things besides morality in the world, such as biology and economics. It is not the case that all disease, let's step back and not editorialize. It is certainly the case that eradicating disease through moral exhortation has a less compelling historical track record than eliminating disease through medicine. Swift is living through an age of real scientific advance and discovery, including real medical discovery. He views doctors as suspicious. So the attack in chapter 5 on lawyers is over the top and darkly hilarious, where it's like, oh yeah, these are lawyers. They're trained to say black is white and white is black, and if I want somebody else's cow, I get the lawyer to lie for me and say it's my cow. Then if I'm trying to defend it, it's not as good because like lawyers actually telling the truth, they're at a disadvantage and they feel uncomfortable with it. This is a joke, but not entirely a joke. Swift does feel that the modern world is corrupt and the various professions are not run appropriately. He takes it to an extreme, absurd conclusion that all lawyers are complete liars and that judges, being successful lawyers themselves, or look askance on the truth. Well, this is not really how it is, but it is a compelling flip side of the coin whereby, they're all standing for truth, justice, and the British way, which isn't quite what happens every time you go to court. In around pages 231, 232, and 233, Gulliver explains illnesses as a result of eating imported food, of foreign trade. Gulliver, and to some extent Swift's position, is that England has impoverished itself and made its population ill by luxury, specifically by international trade. His claim is that medicine, it's drinks, it's sauces, it's eating things you don't need. Luxury makes you ill. And there's the idea that if it weren't for all these modern luxuries, we'd all be happy and rich. The Gulliver and Swift position is that poverty, illness, various kinds of distress are effects of modern luxuries. If we just got back to an earlier, simpler time, these problems would go away. And this is a real response to like a complex society where things are changing and where there are winners and losers. So on page 232, this is part of part 4, chapter 6 of Gulliver's Travels. Gulliver claims that England was computed to produce 3 times the quantity of food, more than its inhabitants are able to consume, as well as liquors, extracted from grain, or pressed of the fruits of certain trees, which made excellent drink, and the same proportion in every other convenience of life. But in order to feed the luxury and intemperance of the males and the vanity of the females, we sent away the greatest part of our necessary things to other countries, from whence in return we brought the materials of diseases, folly, and vice to spend among ourselves. Here follows of necessity that vast numbers of our people are compelled to seek their livelihood by begging, robbing, stealing, cheating, pimping, forswearing, flattering, suborning, forging, gaming, lying, fawning, hectoring, voting, scribbling, stargazing, poisoning, whoring, canting, libeling, free thinking, and the like occupations. every one of which terms I was at much pains to make him understand. The Winhams live in an idealized pre-modern society where the things that make the 18th century so 18th century just haven't happened. That's one of the reasons Swift, with some caveats and asterisks, points to them as utopic. The dystopia, the disaster, is what makes the 18th century the 18th century, which is international trade and the incredible growth of commerce. He says earlier here, I assured him that this whole globe of the earth must be at least three times gone around before one of our better female yahoos could get our breakfast or a cup to put it in. Swift is a misogynist. Swift does tend to blame women, especially for vice. The female yahoos are given an even tougher time than the male yahoos. He is also describing a modern phenomenon that exists today that begins in the 18th century. So, what did I have for breakfast today? I had coffee. Yes, I did. I had some in the afternoon as well. Coffee is a substance to which, and Gulliver would say, I am addicted to a needless luxury which does not grow in my country. It doesn't. What else did I have for breakfast this morning? Things that do not grow in the United States. This is a banana. I bought it in Cleveland Heights. It does not grow in Cleveland Heights or indeed anywhere within the United States. It had to be imported. Today, as in Gulliver and Swift's day, just to get through breakfast in the Western world, you eat the produce of many nations. You are involved in international trade by breakfast, and this, Swift and Gulliver imply, is the cause of all kinds of disasters. Modern luxuries, intemperance and vanity and decadence, modern luxury is the cause of economic and medical problems. I will say this, that position itself is a modern luxury. Only in the 18th century do we begin to hear people complaining that in the old days, before international trade, everything was simpler and healthier and more prosperous. In fact, nobody from the Middle Ages or 16th century said, oh my God, we're having too much trade for food we don't need, because that wasn't their experience. Nobody, the actual people who live in the past that Swift talks about do not experience themselves as living in the utopia Swift claims it was. Swift claimed through Gulliver that England can grow 3 times as much food as its people need. That is not Shakespeare's experience, or Spencer's. They live at the same time, though Spencer dies earlier. The 16th century experience of English agricultural productivity is repeated famine. Oh my God, the harvest failed again, the 7th time in a row. Nobody in Chaucer's day is like, man, we just got to get out of this trade thing because there's just too much stuff. Wouldn't be happy if we just lived by the necessities. The people living in that pre-global trade environment are mostly looking to get more because they're hungry. Are they just vicious and intemperate and lazy and indolent? Maybe. But I would point out the historical record shows that England gets much, much richer from international global commerce. We can say that some countries were impoverished by this. We cannot say England was impoverished by this. And Swift is playing fast and loose. He's claiming individuals in this economy are falling behind. Yeah, but England is getting much, much richer. It's also not the case that people were healthier before they began to eat imported foodstuffs. They were dying of the bubonic plague. Let's be real clear. People like in Chaucer's day, in Shakespeare's day, they had smallpox, they had bubonic plague. Smallpox doesn't come from having a banana. Smallpox doesn't come from coffee. That's ridiculous. The fantasy that like the Wyndhams can just they live a natural life and therefore and that therefore and they don't therefore they never get sick till just before they die is a fantasy, a wish fulfillment, very much at odds with the life expectancy and medical records we have of England before Swift's time and during Swift's time. It's not the case that modernity brought in the diseases. Oh, good heavens, no. Also, eating this banana doesn't make me less healthy. I eat it because it's good for me, because it has vitamins and minerals that I could not otherwise get. Now, Gulliver claims, oh, if you just eat like oats soaked in milk, everything is great. That's all nature needs. I don't need any salt. And then there's the fantasy that your body doesn't need any salt. That is ridiculous. It is the case in 21st century America that all of us get too much salt. It is not the case that the human body doesn't need it. The human body will, in fact, die without it. That's why your body craves it, right? That is a ridiculous fantasy. Um, Gulliver is, and here it's not just Gulliver being stupid. Swift, on some level, wants you to take these ideas seriously. That we could all just eat oatmeal for every meal, and we would be healthier without any vitamins or minerals or protein. This is this fantasy that back before international trade, globalization, before England built its trade empire, which made it incredibly wealthy, everything was simpler, nicer, you never got sick. Okay, this is a modern fantasy. We have to move into a level of highly sophisticated modern economy to start to have this fantasy, this luxury fantasy, that the old days were so much simpler and everything was great. If only I could just eat everything. Yeah, if I eat local, that's good for me, as a sense of like I'm going to eat more things that are grown locally. They haven't lost nutrients and transport, etc. But if I eat nothing but what grows in Ohio, whose straight tree as a poisonous fruit, I am not going to thrive medically. I'm going to be short of various vitamins. Things are not going to go well for me, and people were not physically healthier before this regime began. Now, our culture still believes in this. If we go back to the state of nature, everything will be great. People who lived closer to nature in earlier eras can't afford this fantasy because they're living close to nature. They know it's not fabulous. It's actually hard, and they die early. This idea is related to the Garden of Eden idea that we've seen in various ways in Milton and in Ben, but it's now literalized. It's not theological the way it is for Milton. For Milton's like, yeah, there used to be this garden where all things that humans needed were provided effortlessly. This is a kind of expansion on this is a kind of expansion of or elaboration upon the book of Genesis, which tells us before the fall nobody had to work. And then something religious happened, a religious spiritual event happened that estranged humankind from nature, and since then we've been estranged from nature. This morphs into a secular. Swift is very much a believing Christian and a clergyman, but this is a secularized version of that. The idea that nature itself is good. This is a fantasy that only advanced technological societies, and we're going to start in the 18th century, advanced societies have, that simpler technologies are, simpler solutions are healthier, that nature is good, and then people are good, and then society corrupts you. Milton's position was nature is bad for us. It has been since the garden. It was good for us once, but since like day 11, it's been bad. And that since then, human nature itself has been corrupt. Swift goes two ways. He thinks human nature is bad, but he also thinks society corrupts you. There is the fantasy that people are naturally good and corrupted by society. This is still an idea that has legs in our modern society. It begins in the long 18th century. But it's not an idea that people had when they lived closer to nature and when they could afford fewer luxuries.